following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
Hello and welcome. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. We have a packed show for you, and our big focus continues to be on the Israel-Hamas war. For days now, Israel has been claiming that Hamas has reached breaking point in Gaza. But is that really the case? On Tuesday, 10 Israeli soldiers were killed in a single attack in northern Gaza in what turned out to be one of the deadliest days for the Israeli forces since the ground invasion began. Most of the deaths came in the Shijaya district of Gaza City, where the troops were ambushed, trying to rescue another group of soldiers who had attacked Hamas fighters in a building. Some say the tenacious fighting underscores how far Israel appears to be from its stated objective of destroying Hamas even after its military unleashed one of the 21st century's most destructive onslaughts. According to the official count, 116 Israeli Defense Forces soldiers have been killed in the Gaza combat since the beginning of the ground invasion. Of course, that number is dwarfed by the growing death toll amongst Palestinians in Gaza. At last count, over 18,600 according to the Gazan Health Ministry. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the military would fight on, despite international pressure for a ceasefire. He told soldiers in Gaza over radio, "We're continuing until the end, until victory, until Hamas is annihilated. I say this in the face of great pain, but also in the face of international pressures. Nothing will stop us." That's what he said. Reacting to the Tuesday ambush that left 10 Israeli soldiers dead, Hamas said the episode showed that Israeli forces could never subdue Gaza. Hamas says the longer you stay there, the greater the bill of your deaths and losses will be, and you will emerge from it carrying the tale of disappointment and loss, God willing. In a televised address, Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh also said any future arrangement in Gaza without Hamas was an illusion and a mirage. Meanwhile, recent polls in both Gaza and Israel seem to reflect a further hardening of positions on both sides. At least 90% of Israeli citizens say the army should not back off its unrelenting offensive to crush Hamas despite the UN General Assembly ceasefire call, the growing list of troop casualties and a spiraling Palestinian death toll in the Gaza Strip. On the other side of the border, anger over the war's toll appears to have brought a surge in support amongst Palestinians for Hamas, which has ruled Gaza since 2007 and touts itself as resisting the Israeli occupation. A poll conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research found that 44% of the respondents in the occupied West Bank said they support Hamas, up from just 12% in September. In Gaza, Hamas enjoys 42% support, up from 38% 3 months ago. The poll also shows an overwhelming rejection of Western-backed Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, with nearly 90% saying he must resign. Many Palestinians view the octogenarian leader's administration as corrupt, autocratic and ineffective. In other developments, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan discussed the war with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. Sullivan is in the Middle East en route to Israel, where he is scheduled to meet with Israeli officials amid unprecedented rising tensions between the Biden administration and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government over Israel's prosecution of the war. U.S. officials have been quoted as saying Sullivan will hold extremely serious conversations with Israeli officials about humanitarian aid and the next phase of Israel's military campaign. This comes as the White House struggles to square President Biden's comments about indiscriminate bombing in Gaza with its insistence that Israel's intent is to limit civilian casualties. Even as Israel's international isolation continues, many are asking whether the Biden administration's firm support for Israel's operation in Gaza will alienate the United States from its friends in a way that could severely compromise its wider national security goals. And the unrelenting toll on Palestinians is also increasing the political price that President Biden is paying at home for his backing of Israel and raising doubts about his capacity to invigorate his political coalition ahead of the 2024 US presidential election. On Wednesday, Biden administration staffers held a vigil in front of the White House to call on President Biden to support a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. They termed the rising death toll in Gaza as unacceptable. The United States has repeatedly blocked ceasefire calls at the United Nations Security Council. Its stance is at odds with most countries which voted on Tuesday to demand an immediate humanitarian ceasefire at the UN General Assembly. Last month, more than 700 staffers and political appointees signed a letter calling on President Biden to support a ceasefire in Gaza. Amidst all this, reports have emerged suggesting that according to US intelligence assessment, nearly half of the air-to-ground munitions that Israel has used in Gaza have been unguided, otherwise known as dumb bombs. Unguided munitions are typically less precise and can pose a greater threat to civilians, especially in such a densely populated area as Gaza, and may be contributing to the soaring civilian death toll.
I want you to pass this along to the last of the soldiers. We are continuing until the end, until victory, until Hamas is annihilated. Let there be no doubt about this. This is important. It is a message I want to convey to each and every soldier over there. I say this in the face of great pain, but also in the face of internal pressures. Nothing will stop us. We will go to the end, to the victory, no less than that. I thank you. We do it because of you, through you, with God's help, with your help. Thank you so much. Today there's a heavy feeling in the face of the loss. We are at the stage where large forces are operating in the Gaza Strip, making contact with the enemy. The more we widen our operations, the more there are clashes, and unfortunately, the more soldiers are hit. We are using a range of creative means to damage the tunnels. Some of those methods include tactical activity, meaning we use some tools to force the terrorists out of the tunnels. Other methods are for permanently destroying the tunnels. The more methods we use, the better, but we will not provide the enemy with information on where and what methods we are using.
Before October 7th, our team was working very hard on normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which was going to be, we still think there's hope here, to be a stepping stone to get closer to a two-state solution. So we were very actively engaged in trying to set the parameters and set the conditions for a two-state solution going forward. Now, obviously, the events of October 7th have somewhat derailed that opportunity. Everybody's focused rightly on what's going on in Gaza, but that doesn't mean we're giving up on that.
The children in Gaza, of course, are in a very destitute situation, being exposed to some waterborne diseases because the water that they are using is not safe drinking water. And of course, they do not have the food that is usually available for a normal child in a normal family. And we understand that food is one of the basic necessities. And in addition, of course, the children are totally traumatized from all the noises that they have been through, from the experiences. Many of them have seen their parents dead, or their other family members, or their friends. There is nothing normal in the life of a child today in Gaza.
All right. So what do these latest developments really mean for the Israel-Hamas war? To understand that, we are joined by a panel of experts. From Israel, we have with us Colonel Myri Eisen, Director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism at the Reichman University. Rishaya Rosenman, head of the South Asia Project. Sharka NGO in Israel is also with us, as is Lev Aaron, Israeli columnist and journalist. A warm welcome to all my guests. Before we begin this discussion, I need to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. We have a lot more for you on the other side.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है Money9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
All right, let's go straight across to our guests. Let me start with Colonel Myri Eisen. Colonel Eisen, welcome back to Global Lens. Good to have you on the show. Let's begin with this very concerning development that took place on Tuesday with 10 Israeli soldiers being killed in a single attack in northern Gaza. This was an ambush, and it has turned out to be one of the deadliest days for the Israeli forces since the ground operations began on the 27th of October. Now, there are many who are saying that this essentially shows that Israel may be quite far from achieving its stated goal of finishing Hamas, contrary to some of the claims that have been made in the recent past by the Israeli forces, the defense minister and even the prime minister, who've been saying it is the beginning of the end of Hamas. In fact, Hamas too has issued a statement reacting to the Tuesday ambush that left 10 of your soldiers dead, saying, you know, the longer you stay there, the greater the bill of your deaths and losses will be. And you will emerge from it carrying the tale of disappointment and loss. Your thoughts on how much of a setback this really is for Israel?
It's not a setback at all. And in that sense, as I'm listening to whatever comes out of Hamas, you and I, Neha, I think we can take that with a little grain of salt when they put anything out. It has been what they're going to call their only success until now from October 7th. And I can't think of October 7th as a success in that barbaric attack. But let's address specifically the events of Tuesday. Neha, you and I have spoken here over the last months over what Hamas has prepared up front inside the Gaza Strip. They prepared the city of Gaza, all of these different neighborhoods, as urban defense systems. They prepared within them booby-trapped arenas. And I'm not saying that Tuesday was not hard. It was hard. It is sad. But Tuesday was an event that I have to say, as a military person, I'm more surprised it didn't happen before. It's not an ambush. It's those different arenas of booby traps that Hamas have been placing in a variety of places. And until now, systematically, slowly, working carefully, we managed as a military to avoid, to take them away. We've had other casualties, smaller amounts, and in this one, it was a harder one. But as we go forward, this is one event, and that one event, as it went on, the commanders immediately are replaced. They're continuing in the action. This is the only way to get to this infrastructure, that horrible word, to be able to destroy these Hamas capabilities, and doing so in that systematic, careful way. There will be casualties. It was a hard day, but this is not any kind of change, not in Israel's plan, not in where we're going. And yes, we are already at the stage that in the northern Gaza Strip, the only area where there is even this kind of capability is in this neighborhood of Shaja'iyah, and they're going to continue to try, but this is they're talking, we're acting.
They're talking, Israel is acting, you say. Of course, it's a fact that 116 Israeli Defense Forces soldiers have been killed in the Gaza combat thus far. But as many would argue that this number is a pretty small one compared to the Palestinian death toll that has been put out by Hamas. At last count, according to the health ministry run by Hamas, it was 18,600, including thousands of women and children. Let me now go across to our other Israeli guest on the panel. Yeshaka Rosenman, you know, reacting to Tuesday's developments, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, he told the soldiers actually over radio in Gaza, we are continuing until the end, until victory, until Hamas is annihilated. I say this in the face of great pain, but also in the face of international pressures. Nothing will stop us. The question is even as Israel says that it's determined to press on with this fight against Hamas, to what extent has it really been successful in achieving its stated military objectives, given that the war has now gone on for well over 2 months? Not only is international pressure on Israel mounting by the day, there is a growing sense that Washington, Israel's closest ally, is now running out of patience, going by the statements that have been made by none other than President Biden himself, who said a couple of days ago that Israel is fast losing the support of the world because of the indiscriminate bombing of Gaza. So even as Prime Minister Netanyahu says nothing will stop us, is it not going to get tougher and tougher for Israel in the days ahead, especially given that the claim that Hamas is on its knees may not really be true?
So, good evening. So, the way I've seen military analysts say is that 2 out of 5 of Hamas's battalions have been almost completely decimated. They have lost, according to Israeli, most conservative estimates, well over 7,000 of their soldiers. That's quite a bit. And the ratio of civilians to armed fighters is one of the lowest in such conflicts anywhere in the world. It was between 2 to 3 civilians for every militant. So that's a very low ratio. As far as the objectives of the war, it's the way most Israelis would see it, and I think this is the way Prime Minister Netanyahu sees it. It's a sink-or-swim situation. We are not fighting Hamas to extract revenge or to show bravado. It is simply to ensure the fact that October 7th will never happen again. And the only way that we think we can do that is by eliminating Hamas, by removing it from power, removing all its military capabilities, and what the day after will look like, whether Israel will control the Gaza Strip or some other force, that remains to be seen. But it is also clear that their education system and their media must be completely redone. It is, you can see on sites such as Palestinian Media Watch or Memory, the kind of wild incitement, genocidal incitement that they preach on their schools, most of which are run by the Palestinian Authority and UNRWA and the media. So all in all, the objective is to eliminate Hamas, and it's sink or swim. We can't just call for a ceasefire, for an immediate ceasefire, such as the radical activists in Washington were calling for, are simply Hamas. They are echoing Hamas's demands, because a ceasefire means, in essence, that Hamas will remain in power and simply build up capabilities until they attack again. We retaliate again, and they again calls for a ceasefire. So it means perpetuating the ongoing conflict. The most humane solution, as horrible as it is to say this, the most humane solution is to continue the war until Hamas is eliminated, and do your best to have a new leadership in Gaza that actually cares for the lives of its own citizens and Israelis, and hopefully someone will care for lives as Israelis as well. When President Biden talks of indiscriminate bombing, I don't know what he is referring to. Israel goes to extraordinary lengths to ensure that civilians are not harmed. This is a very densely populated area. And as I said, the ratio of civilians to armed combatants is very low. And all I can say is that, so if you see these radical protesters who are protesting in Washington, and we're basically following President Biden around anywhere he went, shouting, calling him Genocide Joe, and we accuse you of genocide and things like that. These radical people are a very worrisome sign, because they control the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, who are, in the young generation, have complete prominence in the Democratic Party. We see all these radical universities from Harvard down, from the top, the best universities, all the way down. They were equivocating about, can you call for genocide of Jews, can you not? In the Democratic Party, there is also a caucus, a large electorate who are very powerful among the activists. I don't know how large they are in population, but they're very powerful among the activists. People such as Linda Sarsour and Nihad Awad, the leader of CARE, the radical Muslim representatives in America, who are in line with Hamas. Nihad Awad, it can be found online. His response to the October 7th massacre was complete approval. So it's a very worrying situation that these are people that Biden has to consider when he comes for re-election.
You know, you can call them Muslim activists, but fact of the matter is that these statements have come from none other than your closest and staunchest ally, the President of the United States, who many believe is running out of patience. You say the civilian to combatants ratio is very low. I'm not sure how many will agree with that, because if 18,600 Palestinians at last count were killed, we are told 60% of them were women and children. And also, I don't know how many will agree with your choice of words when you say that the most humane way of dealing with this situation is to continue the war till Hamas is wiped out. As a matter of fact, let me quickly tell you and the viewers that in a televised address, Hamas chief Ismail Haniyeh has said any future arrangement in Gaza without Hamas is a delusion and a mirage. But let me now go across to Lev Aaron. Lev, some very interesting facts have come to light in the last 24 hours. You know, of course, apart from the statements that we've heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Hamas leader who I just quoted, there are some interesting polls that have been conducted in Gaza and in Israel. And these suggest a clear hardening of entrenched positions on both sides, while you have 90% of Israelis who believe that this war to crush Hamas must carry on, no matter how many Palestinians are killed, no matter how many troop casualties Israel suffers, and no matter how much international pressure there may be for a ceasefire. On the other side, you actually have a poll that suggests, this is a poll by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, that suggests that since this war began and as more and more Palestinians have been killed in the Israeli counteroffensive, Hamas has actually seen a surge in the support it enjoys amongst Palestinians. It's gone up significantly in the last few weeks alone. And then there is a very interesting statement by the Qatari Prime Minister, who has said death and destruction in Gaza could radicalize an entire generation. So my question to you, Lev, is simply this. Even as Israel says, we are pressing ahead with this war because we need to wipe out Hamas, is it really moving towards its stated objectives in the right fashion, or could Israel's war strategy end up blowing up in its face?
Okay, let's start with the polls. We see that even in Europe, people are quite forgetting the atrocities of October 7th. And Israel needs to prove again and again its bona fide of its democratic nature. So if in Europe this is the situation, I'm sure that in the West Bank and Gaza, in Gaza they face what is going on, and in the West Bank they watch the Arab channels and also Arab Facebook and TikTok and so on. So I'm sure that what they see is terrible views and they forget what happened on October 7th. So this is like, for one, I'm not surprised that among Arabs in the West Bank, there is more support for the Hamas right now. The second thing is that we need not to forget that quite a few dozens of Hamas decided to stop fighting. And also we see more voices inside Gaza that they are asking Hamas, why are you looting the trucks with the medical equipment, with food and so on. So I agree with you that I don't think these voices, they're like the majority of Gazans right now. But when you live under a dictatorship like in Gaza, or even like the West Bank, you want first to see who is the victor, who won the war, and only then you voice your real opinion, or not your real opinion. So I think that right now, the verdict of Hamas in northern Gaza is done and dusted. They lost it. Also in Shajaiya, which is a traumatic place for us Israelis, and not only in this war, only in the last war with Hamas. So North Gaza, Hamas has lost them. even if it will take a bit more time. And about southern Gaza and Han Yunis and Rafah, we will have to see. Thank you.
All right. I need to take a quick break here. I request my guests to stay on. We have a lot more to unpack on the other side, including this latest report that seems to suggest that Israel might have been using a very large number of unguided munitions in Gaza.
Jyotiraditya Scindia is also facing a litmus test.
There have been corruption charges against all the chief ministers or towering leaders who were rich, but this is not the case with Scindia. So the point is that in modern times, when the society is looking up to good leaders, so Jyotiraditya Scindia could be one of them.
As far as Jyotiraditya Scindia is concerned, even if the BJP loses, Jyotiraditya Scindia will be around for at least another 2 decades. He is young and he has the ability to come back.
This and more streaming now on the world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
Pakistani spy agency ISI's sinister plan to target India. Training women to honey trap top civil and military officials. Counter honey trapping ops initiated by India. But gullible victims still caught in the web. Top military intelligence experts break down the web of deception. Colonel Hani Bakshi explains the phenomena of honey trap.
जहाँ पे भी आपको लगेगा, उनको लगेगा कि there is a person who is susceptible to women, who's making a lot of women friends on the social media. That is where they will make a spoof account and then start luring the person.
Colonel Pavitram Rajan decodes the psyche of the victim and the predator.
But when you go up the chain, no one enforces it to people at the top. That disciplinary regime and the security regime is not enforced at the top. And they usually have a public profile where it is much more easier to approach that person.
A News9 special on how modern technology has added teeth to the ancient spying tactic.
Our story takes you inside Pakistan's honey trap machine.
This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News9 Plus. Download now.
Welcome back to Global Lens. Let me now go back to my guest, Colonel Mari Arson. Let me come to you. You know, now there are these, shall I say, alarming reports. CNN International, for instance, has reported, quoting US intelligence assessment, that nearly half of the air-to-ground munitions, at least 45%, that Israel has used in Gaza since the 7th of October have been unguided. These are often referred to as dumb bombs, as I'm sure you're aware. Now, just for the benefit of our viewers, unguided munitions are typically less precise and can pose a greater threat to civilians, especially in a densely populated area such as Gaza, and may well have contributed to the soaring civilian death toll that we've seen. So my question to you is, Colonel Arson, that, you know, do you not believe that as such reports come to light, there are strong chances that the world opinion is going to turn more and more against Israel? Also, can there really be any justification for using unguided bombs in such a densely populated area such as this? It's lethal.
Neha, we've been having discussions for so many weeks on such a variety of issues. So for a moment, I need to give some kind of setting. Neha, we're in a horrible war. We've been in this war for over 2 months. Hamas did not do an attack on October 7th. They did a full-scale war, and we are in a campaign. Every single military in the world, and this isn't about blaming the others, I take it onto ourselves, has variety of munitions used in different ways. There's no modern military that only has guided missiles. Everybody has all different types and sorts. Israel has been so clear on its trying to, as much as possible, tell civilians to move out of the urban area to save their lives. That doesn't make it less of a humanitarian challenge, but we're trying to save lives. We told them to leave the northern Gaza Strip, and sadly, I say for myself, hundreds of thousands stayed, so we need to make sure that we don't hit them. We came in a ground operation. When you're going in a ground operation, that's not throwing aerial munitions from the air. That is going in so that you have people on the ground, soldiers on the ground, who can see who's there much closer, much more in contact. So in that sense, when we're looking at an overall war, Israel is using the absolutely, it's not a question of legal, because of course they're legal, but the regular munitions that every military uses. You're absolutely right. This is urban warfare. You're absolutely right. There are horrific casualties in urban warfare. And I stand here and I say, and I've said this before, my children are the ones who do the targeting. They would never target a place that has civilians. The use of this type of ammunition or the other, we always check first where there are the civilians. You try to avoid that because that is the right and moral thing to do, let alone the legal thing to do, and what we all want to look at. So taking it just specifically on that, I really do think in this case that we sometimes forget that there's a war going on. And I look at this war both through what we're trying to achieve, which is to destroy Hamas, and where Hamas grew, sprouted, and lives, and that's in the Gaza Strip, an urban area with 2 million people. Now it's trying to find the best way possible, the one that saves the most lives. In a war, there are lives that are going to be lost. It doesn't have to do with the type of munitions.
You know, I can assure you that nobody has forgotten that a war is on. In fact, the world is increasingly alarmed by this war and is desperate to see an end to it, which is why you saw a majority of members of the United Nations General Assembly adopting a resolution asking for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. But let me go across to
I never break in, but that ceasefire did not even mention Hamas. So maybe they don't remember it so well, but that's just me.
Okay, I know that is sort of a sore point for Israel, the fact that Hamas has not been mentioned, but at the same time, it doesn't take away from the fact that more than 18,000 Palestinians have been killed in this war. Yeshaya Rosenman, let me ask you this question. You know, yes, it is a war, but there are rules even in wars. Countries are expected to abide by international humanitarian laws even in the midst of a war. Now, when a country decides to use unguided munitions, drop them on a tiny enclave like Gaza, which is densely populated with 2.3 million people, and then Israel goes on to claim that we are doing our best to minimize civilian casualties and save Palestinian lives, my question simply is, who is going to believe you? Even President Biden, your staunchest supporter, is now having trouble believing your claims.
Well, first I would like to say the issue of the number of 18,000 came up multiple times in this conversation. I would like to refer to a report from Honest Reporting, a site that can be found online, that showed that the numbers are, as many suspected, false. The number simply, you can see the report there by a man named Eisenberg, The numbers don't even add up arithmetically. The numbers of women and children do not add up to the total. The number of children is grossly exaggerated. You can compare this to other conflicts in Afghanistan or other countries with very young populations. The numbers simply don't make any sense. The amount of children is simply statistically impossible. And Hamas also does not report on almost any men of combat age that die. Somehow they don't die at all. So but the numbers do not add up. I would suggest to take them with more than a grain of salt. And if people are actually interested in fact checking, that would be a very interesting thing to fact check with different sources. As to you mentioned international humanitarian law. Well, all I can say is again reiterate the simple fact that Israel does everything it can, goes to lengths that other armies do not do to protect civilians, whereas Hamas does everything it can to harm civilians, both on the Israeli side and on the Hamas side, because their aspiration is to kill every Israeli, and their own citizens they do not care for either, because using human shields is their primary defense strategy. I will say even more than that, that the more and more people start talking about civilian casualties, this only incentivizes Hamas more and more to cause civilian casualties, because that is their way to defend themselves. They do not value human life at all, not even their own citizens. I will say, as far as innocent people being killed, Israel does everything it can to target only military combatants, terrorists, military installations. These installations are built under schools, mosques, hospitals, exactly the institutions that should be protected under international humanitarian law, and under the assumption that Israel will not harm them. And when we blow them up, they blow up schools, UNRWA schools, UN schools, under which had tunnels and stockpiles of ammunition, then people say, oh, it's a violation of international law. That is precisely what Hamas wants to do. It weaponizes humanitarian law against its enemies, a weapon against its enemies. So I think more and more fingers should be pointed at Hamas, accusing it of atrocities that it is doing again and again. And people should stop incentivizing them to do this, should recognize this kind of warfare for what it is, that they do not care at all about international law, and they should stop, regardless of what Hamas does. Hamas doesn't care at all about the law, about Israeli lives or Gazan lives, but the international community should care about Gazan lives and about Israeli lives, and should do its best to incentivize Hamas to end the war as soon as possible. They should call for Hamas to surrender and to stop these horrible tactics. I hope that Hamas will be removed and Gaza will no longer have to deal with such a leadership.
You know, it's interesting how you say that the world needs to point fingers at Hamas, hold them accountable for what's happened, and Israel is only responding to what Hamas has done. I think we will need to remember that Hamas is a terror organization, and I have no hesitation in saying that they are monsters, given what they did to the Israeli people on the 7th of October, given what they are also doing to their own people, the Palestinians. But Israel is a civilized democracy, and a civilized democracy is expected to do better than a terror organization filled with monsters like these Hamas fighters. So I am not sure that Hamas's actions should be an ideal benchmark for how Israel conducts itself during a war. But I see no
comparison. I don't see Israeli soldiers raping Gazan women and mutilating their bodies.
I only said that because you keep saying, why is the world not holding Hamas accountable? I'm saying that all those people who are asking for a humanitarian ceasefire, they are not they're not defending Hamas and its actions. All they're saying is that we expect better from Israel, a civilized democracy. That is my limited point here. But Lev Aaron, I want to ask you two questions. One, your thoughts on this alarming report that has emerged, which says that Israel has been dropping unguided munitions on this tiny, densely populated enclave that is home to 2.3 million people. Honestly, who is going to believe that this is a humane way of conducting a war? That's one. And two, your thoughts on the growing unease in Washington. There are many commentators who are saying that even as Israel's international isolation continues, and you will agree that that is the case, there are many who are now asking whether the Biden administration's support for Israel could end up alienating the United States from its friends, which could severely compromise America's national security goals, and whether President Biden could end up paying a heavy political price for his backing of Israel, given that he has an election to face next year. We've heard what President Biden has said this week. So, can Israel really afford to ignore what the United States of America has to say? Because the United States is now increasingly and publicly expressing its strong disapproval of Israel's ways.
Okay, so first of all, I feel that I'm too biased about the ammunition because, as you know, we have a mandatory service, and I'm a former intelligence and infantry soldier. And I know from my own experience that sometimes unguided and guided ammunition, the effect is the same as far as the death toll is concerned. So, in a way, I'm too biased to answer this question because it comes back to my memories of my military service. So I will go to Biden with your permission, okay?
Sure.
Okay. I think that as far as Europe is concerned, Central Europe and Western Europe, I think for them, the idea that Trump comes back to power next year, in 1 year from now, in the next election, they don't like this idea. Not as far as Russia and Ukraine are concerned, and not as far as NATO is concerned, and not as far as Israel and Palestinian Authority are concerned. So I think since Trump is such a hellish and nightmarish candidate for some kind of a partnership between Europe and the United States, I don't think they are really only focused on what is happening in Gaza. I think Biden knows that he needs from time to time to scold Israel. Also, I think moderate Sunni countries around us, they also know that they need from time to time to scold us, even for their domestic politics. I don't think that the frame that we should, or the gaze that through which we should look at the picture is only the Gaza-Israeli war.
Okay, you seem to believe that is mere posturing by the US president, who has probably a tough election against Donald Trump next year. But fact of the matter is that growing concerns are being expressed by the Biden administration over the rising death toll in Gaza and over how Israel is conducting this war. All right, I'm completely out of time. So on that note, Colonel Mari Eisen, Yeshai Rosenman and Lev Aaron, thank you very much for joining me on Global Lens. I look forward to having all of you back on the show. All right, from the Israel-Hamas war, let's now turn our attention to domestic politics in the United States of America. The US House of Representatives has voted to formally authorize its ongoing impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden as Republicans unite behind the effort, even though they have yet to find evidence of wrongdoing by Biden. The Republican-controlled chamber voted 221 to 212 along party lines to approve the probe, which is examining whether Biden improperly benefited from his 53-year-old son, Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings, hours after the younger Biden refused a call to testify behind closed doors. The White House has dismissed the inquiry as unsubstantiated by facts and politically motivated. Biden is preparing for a possible 2024 election rematch with his Republican predecessor, Donald Trump. Trump is the first president in US history to be impeached twice and is currently preparing for 4 upcoming criminal trials. The effort will almost certainly fail to remove Biden from office. Even if the House votes to impeach the president, the Senate would then have to vote to convict him on the charges via 2/3 vote, which is a near impossibility in a chamber where Biden's fellow Democrats hold a 51-49 majority. But It could help Republicans highlight their allegations of corruption through much of the 2024 campaign. The vote comes 3 months after Republicans informally began the probe. Authorization could give Republicans more legal authority to force Biden's administration to cooperate and could help to counter accusations from Democrats who say that this probe lacks legitimacy. House Republicans allege that Biden and his family profited from his actions when he served as President Barack Obama's vice president between 2009 and 2017, and they have zeroed in on his son's business ventures in Ukraine and China during that period.
Mr. Speaker, impeachment, especially impeachment of a president, is a starkly serious matter. It is something that no member of the House should want to do, but the House has rights and obligations under the Constitution. We are charged with providing the oversight of the executive branch, and we are the sole institution in the country granted the awesome power of impeachment. It is a power that must be used selectively and wisely, and only after full deliberations. With today's resolution, we're ensuring that the House will be able to complete its inquiry. We will secure the evidence we need and uncover the facts we need to make the full and fair determination. And only at the end of the road can we make a decision on how to proceed. I take no joy in today's resolution, but I know the House will do its duty.
From the United States, let's now turn our attention to Russia. Addressing his end-of-the-year press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin today said peace with Ukraine will only take place when we achieve our objectives. He was fielding questions from journalists and ordinary Russians in his first marathon news conference since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February 2022. Much of the largely choreographed event focused on what he calls the special military operation in Ukraine. Putin insisted the situation was improving throughout the front line. The direct line program, televised for more than 4 hours by most major channels, began with Putin telling Russians, the existence of our country without sovereignty is impossible. It will simply not exist. Putin said there will be peace in Ukraine when we achieve our objectives. Those objectives do not change. He said, listing denazification, demilitarization, and Ukraine's neutral status. These are themes that Putin has highlighted from the beginning of this war. At one point, he revealed that Russia currently has a total of 617,000 troops fighting in Ukraine. He also claimed that on top of the 300,000 people called up for service last year, another 486,000 have signed up voluntarily as contract soldiers. Putin gave no number of military losses, but disclosed that children of people within his close circle have fought for so-called private military companies, and a number of people close to him have died in the last year and a half. A classified U.S. intelligence report estimated this week that 315,000 Russian soldiers had been either killed or wounded since the war began, which it said was almost 90% of Russia's military personnel at the start of the invasion. Aside from the spontaneous questions put to Putin by Russian and international journalists, a reported 2 million questions were submitted for the event by ordinary Russians and carefully vetted beforehand. Describing Ukraine's military success in a small area as a last-ditch attempt by Ukraine to break through to Crimea, Putin explained that Russian forces decided to withdraw several meters into wooded areas to save our lads, as he put it. He went on to suggest that Kiev's main motive is to show the West that it needs more military funding. Putin said support for Ukraine from its allies was running out. The Russian president also spoke about the situation in Gaza, describing it as a catastrophe unfolding on a scale that was nothing like Ukraine. Also, Putin blamed the US for explosions that destroyed the Nord Stream pipelines to Russia in September last year, without offering any proof though.
There will be peace when we achieve our goals that you've just mentioned. Now let's return to these goals. They've not changed. I'll remind you what we talked about then. The denazification of Ukraine, its demilitarization, its neutral status. As for demilitarization, if they don't want to come to an agreement, then we are forced to take other measures, including military ones. Today, Ukraine produces practically nothing. They are trying to save something, but they produce almost nothing. Everything is bought in for free. But this freebie may end someday. and apparently it is ending little by little. The length of the line of contract is over 2,000 kilometers. There is a grouping of 617,000 people in the combat zone. I think those are the gaps that the Defense Ministry should have prevented. What the problem is about? Formally, legally, there are no private military companies in Russia. They are not provided for by law. This is the problem. Secondly, members of the so-called private military companies have not signed agreements with the country to take part in military actions. It is the main problem. It were the commanders of those private military companies who were in relations with the state. Unfortunately, they were paid in cash. It is very hard to define the personnel of those private military companies now. Regarding normalization of relations, it does not just depend on us. It was not us who spoiled these relations. It was them who spoiled the relations with us. They have always been trying to push us to back, neglecting our interests. Under these conditions, when the US planned and organized, and Europe is standing silently and watching or even dance along, how can we build relations with them? We don't mind. It was not us who cut them off. But they are pretending that they don't know or remember anything. They just said a couple of times that they were just pretending when they signed Minsk agreements and were not going to implement anything.
A 4-hour-long press conference held by Russian President Vladimir Putin and fielding questions on the Ukraine war. Well, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow.
Since the last 2 years, Khalistani terror groups are threatening Indian diplomats in Canada, US, UK and Australia. Investigations of these threats led us to the first ever abduction and killing of an Indian diplomat, Ravindra Matre, in UK's Birmingham in 1984. Our months-long investigation finally led us to the murderer of Ravindra Matre, who has been hiding in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir for the last 40 years. Watch our exclusive documentary, Murder of an Indian Diplomat, where we reveal the man who killed Ravindra Matre.
Stop searching, start streaming. Download the world's first news OTT, News9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
With all this gear, you must be wondering if I'm climbing a mountain. Well, let me give you a wider look of this place. This is Asia's largest mountain of shame.
A mountain of waste, almost the height of the Qutub Minar.
When you enter capital cities of some of the biggest countries in the world, you don't have 3 garbage mountains waiting to welcome you, depending on whichever side of the city you enter from.
The thing is that a lot of times we talk about landfills only when there's a fire at the landfill. You need to understand that a landfill is at fire almost throughout the year. It's only when the firefighters are not able to douse the fire is when it actually catches the nation's attention, the city's attention, or media attention.
The towering landfills worsen one of Delhi's biggest problems: pollution.
यहाँ पर आप रात को आओ, दिन में आओ, आप 1 घंटे बैठ नहीं सकते बाहर। इतनी धूल, प्रदूषण, महक, आप खाना भी नहीं खा सकते बाहर बैठ के।
Life around the landfill is a curse.
हमारे घर में जो बड़े हैं, उन्हें अस्थमा के वो पेशेंट है। आए दिन उनको नेबुलाइजर लगाना पड़ता है।
डॉक्टर ने मुझे ये चीज बोला कि यहाँ का एरिया छोड़ के कहीं और चाहिए।